The alarm clock screamed at 4:30 a.m., but Maya was already awake. She had been lying in bed for the past 20 minutes, staring at the water stain on her ceiling and calculating numbers in her head. Rent was due in 3 days. Her daughter's school shoes had a hole that was getting bigger every day. The electricity bill sat unopened on her kitchen counter because she was too scared to see how much it was this month. Maya quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her 6-year-old daughter who was sleeping peacefully beside her. Their tiny one-bedroom apartment didn't have space for 2 beds, so they shared the old mattress that came with the place. The springs creaked no matter how carefully you moved, but little Zoe could sleep through anything. In the dim light from the street lamp outside their window, Maya looked at her work uniform hanging on the back of the bathroom door. The white shirt was getting yellow around the collar no matter how much bleach she used. The black pants had been mended so many times that they looked more like a patchwork quilt. But they were clean, and that's what mattered. She had exactly 47 minutes to get ready, take the bus across town, and clock in at La Belle Epoque restaurant. Being even 1 minute late meant getting written up, and 3 write-ups meant losing her job. Maya couldn't afford to lose this job. It was the best-paying one she'd had in months, even though the customers treated her like she was invisible most days. The bus ride took 35 minutes if traffic was good. Maya pressed her face against the cold window and watched the city change as they moved from her neighborhood to the fancy downtown area. The buildings got taller and cleaner, the cars got newer and shinier. The people on the streets wore clothes that probably cost more than Maya made in a month. When she arrived at the restaurant, the morning prep was already underway. The kitchen was a symphony of chopping, sizzling, and shouting in 3 different languages. Maya tied her apron and jumped in to help wherever she could. Today was special. They were hosting some kind of charity dinner for rich people who wanted to feel good about themselves by writing checks while eating expensive food. "Maya, you're on the main dining room tonight," said her manager, Mr. Peterson. He was a nervous man who sweated a lot and always seemed one complaint away from a heart attack. "Big important people coming in. No mistakes, okay? These folks can make or break us." Maya nodded and spent the rest of the afternoon helping set up the dining room. Crystal glasses that cost more than her monthly grocery budget. Silverware so polished she could see her reflection. Flowers that would die in 3 days but probably cost what she made in a week. Everything had to be perfect for people who already had everything. At 5 o'clock, Maya changed into her serving uniform. She noticed a small stain on her shirt from when she helped in the kitchen earlier. Just a tiny spot of sauce that she couldn't quite scrub out in the bathroom sink. She tried to position her name tag to cover it, but you could still see it, if you looked closely. She hoped no one would notice. The first guests started arriving at 6. Maya watched through the kitchen door as expensive cars pulled up outside. Men in suits that fit perfectly, women in dresses that sparkled under the restaurant lights. Everyone looked like they had just stepped out of a magazine. Then she arrived. Victoria Sterling was the kind of woman who commanded attention without saying a word. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect bun. Her jewelry caught the light from across the room. When she walked, people moved out of her way automatically like she had some invisible force field around her. Maya had heard the other servers talking about Mrs. Sterling in whispers. She owned some big pharmaceutical company and was worth billions of dollars. She donated money to charities and had her picture in magazines, but she was also known for being difficult. Very difficult. Mrs. Sterling was seated at the best table in the house, right in the center of the dining room where everyone could see her. She had 3 people with her: her assistant who wrote down everything she said, her business partner who nodded at everything she said, and her lawyer who looked scared of everything she said. Maya was assigned to their section. She took a deep breath, picked up her notepad, and walked over to the table. This was her job. She was good at her job. She could handle any customer no matter how demanding they were. "Good evening," Maya said with her warmest smile. "Welcome to La Belle Epoque. My name is Maya and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Mrs. Sterling looked up from her menu and her eyes immediately locked onto the small stain on Maya's shirt. Her face twisted like she had just smelled something horrible. "Excuse me," Mrs. Sterling said, her voice carrying across the now quiet dining room. What exactly is that on your uniform? Maya looked down at the tiny spot of sauce. Her heart started beating faster. I'm sorry, ma'am. I helped in the kitchen earlier and I must have... You must have what? Mrs. Sterling's voice got louder. You must have thought it was acceptable to serve paying customers while looking like you just crawled out of a dumpster. The entire restaurant went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every fork was set down. Everyone was staring at their table, watching this rich woman destroy a waitress over a stain the size of a dime. This is absolutely disgusting, Mrs. Sterling announced, making sure her voice reached every corner of the room. How dare you approach my table looking like some kind of vagrant? I demand to speak to your manager immediately. Maya felt her face burn with embarrassment. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, judging her, pitying her. She wanted to disappear into the floor. She wanted to run out of the restaurant and never come back. But she needed this job. Zoe needed her to keep this job. I'm very sorry, ma'am, Maya said quietly. Let me get my manager for you right away. Mr. Peterson came rushing over, already sweating more than usual. He took one look at Mrs. Sterling's angry face and immediately went into damage control mode. Mrs. Sterling, I am so terribly sorry about this, he said, shooting an angry look at Maya. This is completely unacceptable. Maya, what were you thinking coming out here looking like that? Maya stood there, humiliated in front of everyone, while her boss joined in the attack. She thought about her daughter at home, probably doing her homework at the kitchen table under the broken light. She thought about the rent that was due in 3 days. She thought about the electricity bill she was too scared to open. I want her removed from my section immediately, Mrs. Sterling demanded. Someone who clearly has no respect for herself certainly has no respect for her customers. Honestly, where do you find these people? The other wealthy diners murmured their agreement. A few even laughed. Maya felt like she was shrinking, getting smaller and smaller until she might just vanish completely. Of course, Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Peterson said. Maya, go clean yourself up and I'll assign you to a different section. And we'll be having a serious conversation about professional standards after tonight. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice to work. She walked away from the table with her head down, feeling the stares of everyone in the restaurant. In the bathroom, she scrubbed at the tiny stain until her fingers were raw, but it wouldn't come out completely. She looked at herself in the mirror. Same face that had smiled at her daughter that morning. Same hands that had braided Zoe's hair before school. Same person who worked 16-hour days just to keep them afloat. But in this fancy restaurant surrounded by these wealthy people, she felt like nothing. Maya took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked back out into the dining room. She had work to do, and no matter how they treated her, she was going to do it well. She had to. She had no idea that in less than an hour, everything would change. Maya spent the next 30 minutes in the back section of the restaurant, serving tables of regular customers who treated her like a normal human being. She smiled at an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary, helped a businessman choose wine for his date, and even got a decent tip from a family with young kids who made a mess, but said please and thank you. But she could still hear Mrs. Sterling's voice carrying across the dining room. Even from 3 tables away, that sharp, demanding tone cut through all the other conversations like a knife. Maya tried not to listen, but it was impossible to ignore. This wine is completely wrong, Mrs. Sterling was saying to the new server, who had taken over Maya's section. I specifically asked for the 2018 vintage, not this garbage. Are you people completely incompetent? The young server, a college kid named Alex who had only been working there for 2 weeks, stammered out an apology and rushed back to get the correct bottle. Maya felt sorry for him. She remembered her first few weeks here, how every mistake felt like the end of the world. Mrs. Sterling wasn't finished. And why is this table so close to the kitchen door? Every time someone walks through, I can smell the grease. This is supposed to be a fine dining establishment, not some roadside diner. Her assistant was frantically writing down every complaint in a little notebook, like each criticism was incredibly important. Her business partner kept nodding and making agreeing sounds, even though he looked uncomfortable. The lawyer just stared at his plate and tried to become invisible. Maya watched this scene play out while she refilled water glasses and cleared plates. She had seen customers like Mrs. Sterling before, people who seemed to think that having money gave them the right to treat others badly, but she had never seen someone quite this cruel, quite this determined to make everyone around her miserable. "The temperature in here is ridiculous," Mrs. Sterling continued, waving her hand dramatically. "It's like an icebox. Don't you people know how to regulate basic climate control? I'm going to catch pneumonia at this rate." Mr. Peterson, who had been hovering near their table like a nervous bird, immediately signaled to someone to adjust the thermostat. Maya could see sweat beading on his forehead despite Mrs. Sterling's complaints about the cold. The appetizers arrived at Mrs. Sterling's table, beautiful little works of art that the kitchen had spent hours preparing. Maya had seen the head chef working on them personally, making sure every garnish was perfect, every sauce was exactly the right consistency. "What is this supposed to be?" Mrs. Sterling picked up her fork and poked at the delicate arrangement on her plate like it was roadkill. "This doesn't look anything like what was described on the menu. And why is it so small? I've seen larger portions at airport food courts." The server tried to explain that it was a chef's special interpretation of the classic dish, but Mrs. Sterling cut him off with a wave of her hand. "I don't want interpretations. I want what I ordered. Take this back and bring me something edible." Maya shook her head and focused on her own tables. She had learned long ago that some people just enjoyed being unhappy. It was like a hobby for them, finding fault with everything and everyone around them. But as the evening went on, Mrs. Sterling's complaints got louder and more personal. She criticized the server's posture, the busboy's speed, even the way the pianist in the corner was playing. Nothing was good enough. Nothing met her impossible standards. "This is exactly why I usually eat at my private club," she announced to her tablemates, though she said it loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. At least there, the staff knows how to behave properly. They understand their place. Maya felt her jaw clench. She had been working in restaurants for 8 years, ever since Zoe was born, and she had never met anyone quite so determined to make other people feel small. It was like Mrs. Sterling fed off the discomfort and embarrassment of others. The main course arrived. Perfectly cooked steaks, seasoned vegetables, and gourmet sides that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Maya could smell them from across the room, and her stomach reminded her that she hadn't eaten anything since a stale bagel that morning. Mrs. Sterling cut into her steak with sharp, aggressive motions, still talking non-stop about everything that was wrong with the restaurant, the service, and apparently the entire world. Her voice had a nasty edge to it now, like she was enjoying the performance of being difficult. "The problem with places like this," she was saying, gesturing with her fork, "is that they hire people who have no business being in the hospitality industry. No class, no education, no understanding of how to treat their betters." Maya felt like Mrs. Sterling was looking right at her when she said it, even though she was supposedly talking to her dinner companions. The words hit like a slap across the face. No class, no education, no understanding. Maya thought about her GED classes that she attended 2 nights a week after her shifts ended. She thought about the first aid course she had taken at the community center, using her tip money to pay for it because she thought it might help her get a better job someday. She thought about all the books she read to Zoe every night, even when she was exhausted, because education was important. But Mrs. Sterling didn't know about any of that. She just saw a waitress with a stain on her shirt and decided that told her everything she needed to know about Maya as a person. "People like that," Mrs. Sterling continued, cutting her meat into smaller pieces, "need to learn their place in society. They need to understand that some of us have worked hard to get where we are and we deserve respect." Maya wondered what kind of work Mrs. Sterling had done. She had heard whispers that the woman had inherited her company from her father, then inherited more money from her husband when he died. What kind of hard work was that? Mrs. Sterling was really getting worked up now, her voice getting higher and more shrill with each complaint. She was cutting her steak aggressively, talking and gesturing at the same time, completely absorbed in her own performance of outrage. "The decline of service standards in this country is absolutely shocking," she declared, stabbing at a piece of meat with her fork. In my day, people knew how to show proper respect to their customers. They understood that the customer is always right. She was talking so fast and so angrily that she wasn't paying attention to what she was doing. Maya noticed that Mrs. Sterling was cutting larger and larger pieces of steak, too focused on her complaints to notice that she was creating chunks that were way too big to eat safely. These people today think they deserve respect just for showing up. Mrs. Sterling continued, waving her fork in the air. Well, respect is earned, not given. And some people will never earn it no matter how hard they try. She speared a particularly large piece of meat on her fork and shoved it into her mouth without really looking at it. She was too busy making her point, too, caught up in her own sense of superiority, to pay attention to something as basic as chewing her food properly. Maya was watching from across the room, and she could see what was happening even before Mrs. Sterling realized it herself. The piece of meat was too big. Mrs. Sterling had been talking so much that she hadn't chewed it properly. She tried to swallow, but the meat got stuck. Suddenly, Mrs. Sterling's hand flew to her throat. Her eyes went wide with panic. She tried to cough, but no sound came out. The color started draining from her face as she realized she couldn't breathe. The nightmare was just beginning. Mrs. Sterling's face was turning red. Her hands clawed at her throat desperately, her eyes wide with terror. She tried to stand up, but her chair caught the edge of the table and she stumbled backward. The crystal wine glass crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. For a moment, nobody moved. The entire restaurant seemed frozen in time. People stared in confusion, not quite understanding what was happening. Some thought she was having some kind of dramatic fit about the food. Others wondered if she was choking on her own anger. Her assistant was the first to react, but not in a helpful way. She started screaming, "Oh my God," over and over again, waving her hands in the air like she was trying to fan away the emergency. Her notebook fell to the floor, pages scattering everywhere. The business partner just sat there with his mouth hanging open, looking like a fish out of water. He kept saying, "Should I call someone? Should I call someone?" But he didn't actually reach for his phone. He just repeated the same question while Mrs. Sterling fought for her life right next to him. The lawyer did grab his phone, but his hands were shaking so badly that he dropped it twice before managing to dial. Even then, he couldn't seem to form words when the emergency operator answered. He just stammered and stuttered while precious seconds ticked away. Mrs. Sterling's face was getting darker now, shifting from red to a scary shade of purple. She stumbled away from the table, bumping into other diners, her hands still clutched around her throat. The sound she was making was horrible, a desperate wheezing that was barely audible, like air trying to squeeze through a straw. The other wealthy customers in the restaurant were no help at all. They pushed their chairs back and moved away from Mrs. Sterling like she had some kind of contagious disease. A few people took out their phones, but instead of calling for help, they started recording videos. In their world, everything was content. For social media, even someone dying. "Someone do something," shouted a woman in diamonds, but she didn't move from her safe spot 3 tables away. "Where's the manager? Where's a doctor?" Mr. Peterson came running over, but he was just as useless as everyone else. He stood there wringing his hands, looking back and forth between Mrs. Sterling and the other customers, like he was trying to solve a math problem. His main concern seemed to be how this would affect his restaurant's reputation. "Should I call 911? He asked nobody in particular. "What do I do? What's the procedure for this?" Mrs. Sterling collapsed to her knees, then fell forward onto her hands. She was crawling, now trying to get air, trying to get help, trying to get anyone to save her life. But all these important, educated, wealthy people just stood around and watched like she was some kind of entertainment. Maya was clearing a table in the back section when she heard the commotion. At first, she thought it was just Mrs. Sterling, making another scene about the service. The woman had been complaining so loudly all evening that Maya had learned to tune out her voice. But something about the screaming sounded different, more urgent, more scared. She looked across the dining room and saw the chaos. People were standing up from their tables, crowding around something on the floor. She could see Mrs. Sterling on her hands and knees, and even from a distance, Maya could tell something was seriously wrong. Maya's first instinct was to stay where she was. After all, Mrs. Sterling had made it very clear that Maya was beneath her, that she had no business being around better people. Why should Maya help someone who had humiliated her in front of an entire restaurant just an hour ago? But then Maya saw Mrs. Sterling's face, the terror in her eyes, the way her body was shaking, the desperate way she was clawing at her throat. And Maya realized that this wasn't about pride or revenge or getting even. This was about a human being who was going to die if someone didn't help her right now. Maya dropped the plates she was holding. They crashed to the floor, but she didn't even notice. She pushed through the crowd of useless, gawking people, ignoring their protests as she shoved past their expensive clothes and jewelry. "Move!" Maya shouted, using a voice she didn't even know she had. "Everyone get back, give her space." Some of the customers looked at her like she was crazy. Who was this waitress to tell them what to do? But something in Maya's voice made them step aside. Maybe it was the confidence, maybe it was the urgency, or maybe it was just that finally, someone was actually doing something instead of standing around like decorations. Maya dropped to her knees beside Mrs. Sterling, who was now lying on her side, her face a terrible shade of blue. Maya had seen this before, in the first aid class she had taken at the community center. She had practiced on plastic dummies, but she never thought she would need to use it in real life. Mrs. Sterling's eyes locked onto Maya's, and in that moment, all the cruelty and arrogance was gone. There was just fear, pure, desperate fear. She was begging Maya with her eyes, pleading for help from the same person she had tried to destroy less than an hour ago. Maya rolled Mrs. Sterling onto her back and tilted her head back to open her airway. She could see that Mrs. Sterling was still conscious, which was good, but her lips were turning blue and she wasn't getting any air at all. "I'm going to help you," Maya said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I know what to do." Maya had learned the Heimlich maneuver at the community center, along with CPR and basic first aid. She had paid for the classes with her tip money, thinking it might help her get a better job at a hospital or nursing home someday. She never imagined she would use it to save the life of someone who had treated her like garbage. Maya got Mrs. Sterling into position and wrapped her arms around her from behind. She found the right spot, just above the belly button and below the ribs, exactly like they had taught her in class. She made a fist with one hand and covered it with the other. This might hurt, Maya warned, though she doubted Mrs. Sterling could hear her anymore. The woman's eyes were starting to roll back and Maya knew she only had seconds left. Maya pulled upward and inward with all her strength. Nothing happened. She tried again, harder this time, using all the muscle she had built from years of lifting heavy trays and working on her feet for 12 hours at a time. Still nothing. The crowd around them was getting louder, more panicked. Someone was yelling about calling an ambulance. Someone else was crying. Mr. Peterson was having what looked like a panic attack in the corner, but Maya blocked it all out. She focused on what she had learned in that community center classroom. She remembered the instructor saying that sometimes it took several attempts. Sometimes you had to be more aggressive than you wanted to be. Sometimes saving someone's life meant hurting them a little. Maya adjusted her grip and tried again. This time she put everything she had into it. All her strength, all her desperation, all her determination. She thought about her daughter at home, about how she would feel if someone just stood around and watched while Maya was dying. On the fourth try, something shifted. Maya felt Mrs. Sterling's body jerk, and suddenly a chunk of partially chewed steak came flying out of her mouth, landing several feet away on the restaurant floor. Mrs. Sterling gasped, sucking in air like someone who had been underwater for too long. She coughed violently, her whole body shaking, but she was breathing. She was alive. Maya stayed beside her, making sure she was okay, checking her pulse, watching her color slowly return to normal. Around them, the restaurant erupted in cheers and applause, but Maya barely heard it. All she could think about was how close they had come to losing someone tonight, and how none of these important, wealthy, educated people had known how to save a life, but she did. The sirens were getting louder outside the restaurant. Someone had finally managed to call 911, and the paramedics were on their way. But Maya wasn't taking any chances. She stayed right beside Mrs. Sterling, watching her breathing, making sure she was really okay. Mrs. Sterling was still coughing and gasping, her hand pressed against her throat. Her perfectly styled hair was now a mess, her expensive makeup was smeared, and her designer dress was wrinkled and stained. But she was alive, and that was all that mattered. "Just breathe slowly," Maya said gently, rubbing Mrs. Sterling's back, the same way she did when her daughter Zoe had a bad dream. "You're okay now. The paramedics are coming." Mrs. Sterling looked up at Maya with eyes that were completely different from the cold, cruel ones from earlier. These eyes were full of confusion, gratitude, and something else. Shame. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as just a whisper. You saved me," she managed to croak. Maya nodded but didn't say anything. What was there to say? That she almost didn't help? That for a split second she thought about walking away and letting someone else handle it? She pushed those thoughts away and focused on making sure Mrs. Sterling stayed stable until the professionals arrived. The paramedics burst through the restaurant doors with their equipment and immediately took over. They checked Mrs. Sterling's vital signs, looked down her throat with a small flashlight, and asked her questions about how she was feeling. Maya stepped back to give them room to work, but she didn't leave. "Who performed the Heimlich?" one of the paramedics asked, looking around at the crowd of well-dressed people. "She did," said Mr. Peterson, pointing at Maya with a mixture of pride and amazement in his voice. "Our waitress saved her life." The paramedic looked at Maya with respect. "You did exactly the right thing," he said. "Another minute or two and we would have been dealing with a very different situation. Where did you learn the technique?" "Community center," Maya replied simply. "I took a first aid class last year." The paramedic smiled. "Well, you remembered it perfectly. You saved this woman's life tonight." As they prepared to take Mrs. Sterling to the hospital, she grabbed Maya's hand. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were intense. "Don't leave," she whispered. "Please, I need to talk to you." Maya looked at Mr. Peterson, who nodded quickly. "Go with them," he said. "Take the night off. This is more important." The ambulance ride was quiet except for the medical equipment beeping and the paramedics checking on Mrs. Sterling every few minutes. Maya sat in the corner, feeling out of place in the clean, high-tech ambulance. She kept thinking about how surreal this whole situation was. A few hours ago, she was being humiliated by this woman in front of a room full of strangers. Now she was riding in an ambulance with her, having just saved her life. At the hospital, Maya waited in the emergency room while the doctors examined Mrs. Sterling. The waiting room was full of people with various injuries and illnesses, and Maya felt more comfortable here than she had in the fancy restaurant. These were regular people, working people, people who understood what it was like to worry about medical bills and time off work. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her babysitter, asking if everything was okay since Maya was so late. Maya realized she had no idea what time it was. She texted back that there had been an emergency at work and she would be home as soon as possible. After what felt like hours, a doctor came out to find Maya. "Mrs. Sterling is asking for you," she said. "She's fine, by the way, no permanent damage. You really did save her life." Maya followed the doctor down the hallway to Mrs. Sterling's room. The woman looked small and vulnerable in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and IVs. Her face was pale and her voice was still hoarse when she spoke. "Please sit down," Mrs. Sterling said, gesturing to the chair beside her bed. "I need to say something to you, and I don't know if I'll have the courage later." Maya sat down, not sure what to expect. Was Mrs. Sterling going to thank her? Apologize? Pretend like the whole humiliation thing never happened? "What I did to you tonight," Mrs. Sterling began, her voice shaky, "was unforgivable. I was cruel and heartless, and I treated you like you were less than human. And then when I was dying, you saved me anyway." Maya didn't respond. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to say. "I've been thinking about it since we got here," Mrs. Sterling continued. "Why did you help me? After what I did to you, why didn't you just walk away?" Maya thought about it for a moment. Because that's not who I am, she finally said. I couldn't just watch someone die, no matter how they treated me. Mrs. Sterling's eyes filled with tears. I wouldn't have done the same for you, she admitted. If the situation was reversed, I probably would have walked away. I would have thought you deserved it somehow. The honesty was brutal, but Maya appreciated it more than empty apologies. I've spent my whole life thinking that money and status made me better than other people, Mrs. Sterling went on. I thought that because I had more, I was more. But you showed me tonight what it really means to be a good person. You have something I've never had. Real character. Maya shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She wasn't used to this kind of praise, especially from someone like Mrs. Sterling. I want to make this right, Mrs. Sterling said. I want to do something to show you how sorry I am and how grateful I am. Please, let me help you. You don't owe me anything, Maya said. I just did what anyone should do. But that's just it, Mrs. Sterling replied. Anyone should do it, but no one else did. Not my assistant, not my business partner, not my lawyer. None of those educated, successful people knew how to save a life. But you did. Maya thought about this. It was true that all those wealthy, important people had just stood around uselessly while she acted. They had expensive educations and fancy jobs, but when it really mattered, they were helpless. Where did you learn first aid? Mrs. Sterling asked. Community center, Maya said. I thought it might help me get a better job someday, maybe at a hospital or something. What kind of job do you want? Maya hesitated. She had never talked about her dreams with someone like Mrs. Sterling. I want to be a nurse. She finally said, I want to help people, but I can't afford nursing school and I can't quit working to go to school full-time. Mrs. Sterling was quiet for a long moment, thinking, what if I told you that you could quit your job tomorrow and go to nursing school full-time? All expenses paid, plus enough money to live on while you're studying. Maya stared at her. I couldn't accept something like that. Why not? Because it's too much, because I barely know you, because... Maya struggled to find the words. Because you think I'm doing it out of guilt? Mrs. Sterling asked. Maya nodded. You're partly right, Mrs. Sterling admitted. I do feel guilty about how I treated you, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is that tonight you showed me what kind of person you are. You're exactly the kind of person who should be a nurse. You're exactly the kind of person the world needs more of. Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes. No one had ever believed in her dreams like this before. Think about it, Mrs. Sterling said. Don't give me an answer tonight, just think about it. And Maya? Yes, thank you. For everything. As Maya walked out of the hospital and into the cool night air, her mind was spinning. Everything had changed in just a few hours. The woman who had tried to destroy her had just offered to change her entire life. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Maya barely slept that night. She kept thinking about Mrs. Sterling's offer, turning it over and over in her mind like a puzzle she couldn't solve. By the time her daughter Zoe woke up for school, Maya had made coffee 3 times and forgotten to drink all of them. Mama, you look tired, Zoe said, climbing onto Maya's lap at their tiny kitchen table. Did you have to work really late? Maya smoothed her daughter's hair and tried to smile. How could she explain what had happened? That she had saved the life of someone who had been cruel to her? That this same person was now offering to pay for her to go to nursing school? Something big happened at work last night, baby, Maya said carefully. Something that might change things for us. Zoe's eyes got wide. At 6 years old, she was already smart enough to know that changes usually meant either very good things or very scary things. In their life, it was usually scary things. Good change or bad change? Zoe asked. I think it might be good change, but Mama needs to think about it some more. After Maya dropped Zoe off at school, she walked to the restaurant instead of taking the bus. She needed time to think, and the 45-minute walk helped clear her head. The morning air was cool and the city was just waking up around her. When she arrived at La Belle Époque, the whole staff was buzzing with excitement. Word had spread about what happened. The night before, and everyone wanted to hear the story from Maya herself. "I heard you saved that rich lady's life," said Carlos, one of the cooks, the one who was being so mean to everyone. "Is it true she offered to pay for you to go to college?" asked Jessica, another waitress. Maya was surprised that news had traveled so fast, but she realized that Mr. Peterson must have heard at least part of her conversation with Mrs. Sterling at the hospital. "I don't know what I'm going to do yet," Maya said honestly. Mr. Peterson called Maya into his office before the lunch shift started. He looked nervous, which wasn't unusual, but this was a different kind of nervous. "Maya, I got a call this morning," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "From Mrs. Sterling's assistant. They want to set up a meeting with you." Maya's stomach flipped. "A meeting?" "Tomorrow morning, at her office downtown. She wants to discuss her offer with you properly." He paused and looked at Maya seriously. "Maya, I don't know what she's planning to offer you, but I want you to know that whatever you decide, your job here will always be waiting for you." That afternoon, Maya's phone started ringing. First, it was a local newspaper reporter who had somehow heard about the story. Then it was a radio station. By evening, there were 3 news vans parked outside her apartment building. Maya was overwhelmed. She had never wanted attention like this. She just wanted to work, take care of her daughter, and maybe someday become a nurse. Now strangers were calling her a hero and asking for interviews. "Mama, why are there TV people outside?" Zoe asked, peeking through their apartment window. "Because something I did at work is on the news," Maya explained. "But we don't have to talk to them if we don't want to." That night, Maya's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, knocked on their door. She was an elderly woman who had always been kind to Maya and Zoe, often babysitting when Maya had to work late. "I saw the news," Mrs. Chen said, holding a plate of homemade cookies. "I'm not surprised at all. You've always been the type to help others even when you didn't have much yourself." Mrs. Chen sat down at Maya's kitchen table and looked at her seriously. "My granddaughter is a nurse," she said. "It's hard work, but it's good work. You help people every day just like you helped that woman last night." "But what if I fail?" Maya asked. "What if I can't handle the studying? What if I'm not smart?" "Enough," Mrs. Chen smiled. "Maya, you've been taking care of everyone around you since you were barely an adult yourself. You raised a beautiful, smart daughter while working multiple jobs. You learned first aid on your own time with your own money because you wanted to help people. You think someone like that isn't smart enough to be a nurse?" The next morning, Maya put on her best outfit, a simple black dress she had bought at a thrift store for job interviews, and took the bus to Mrs. Sterling's office building. It was one of those tall, shiny towers downtown that Maya had always wondered what they looked like inside. The lobby was all marble and gold with security guards in expensive suits. Maya felt out of place, but she took a deep breath and walked to the reception desk. "I'm Maya Rodriguez," she said. "I have an appointment with Mrs. Sterling." The receptionist smiled warmly. "Of course, she's been expecting you. Please take the elevator to the 40th floor." Mrs. Sterling's office was bigger than Maya's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the whole city. Mrs. Sterling was sitting behind a massive wooden desk, but she stood up and walked around it when Maya entered. She looked different than she had at the restaurant. Softer somehow, less intimidating. She was still obviously wealthy and powerful, but she seemed more human. "Maya, thank you for coming," Mrs. Sterling said. "Please sit down. Can I get you some coffee? Water?" They sat in comfortable chairs by the window, and Mrs. Sterling pulled out a folder full of papers. "I've been thinking about our conversation all night," she began, "and I've put together a proposal for you." She opened the folder and spread out several documents. Full tuition and fees for a 4-year nursing program at the state university. A monthly allowance for living expenses, enough that you won't need to work while you're studying. Health insurance for you and Zoe, and if you want, I can arrange for you to work part-time at the hospital where I sit on the board of directors so you can gain experience while you study. Maya stared at the papers. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. It was a completely different life for her and Zoe. "Why?" Maya asked quietly. "Why are you doing this?" Mrs. Sterling was quiet for a moment. Because you showed me something about myself that I didn't like, she said finally. I realized that I've spent years thinking that having money made me a good person, that donating to charity and attending galas somehow made up for how I treated people day to day. She looked out the window at the city below. But when I was dying on that restaurant floor, none of my money mattered. None of my connections or status or power could save me. The only thing that mattered was that there was one person in that room who had the knowledge and the heart to help someone who had been cruel to her. Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes. I want to become the kind of person who would have done what you did, Mrs. Sterling continued. And I want to help you become the nurse you're meant to be. Not because I feel guilty, but because I believe the world needs more people like you. Maya looked at the papers again, then at Mrs. Sterling. If I say yes, this isn't charity. I'm going to work harder than I've ever worked in my life. I'm going to earn this, Mrs. Sterling smiled. I wouldn't expect anything less. 2 years later, Maya walked across the stage at her nursing school graduation. In the audience, she could see Zoe cheering wildly, Mrs. Chen wiping away tears, and Mrs. Sterling applauding with genuine pride. Maya had kept her promise. She had worked harder than ever, studying late into the night, volunteering at the hospital, on weekends, pushing herself to be the best student she could be. But Mrs. Sterling had kept her promise too. She had changed. She started a foundation to help single parents go to college. She volunteered at community centers. She learned to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their job or their bank account. After the graduation ceremony, Maya found Mrs. Sterling in the crowd. "Thank you," Maya said simply. "Thank you," Mrs. Sterling replied, "for showing me how to be a better person." Maya looked around at her daughter, her friends, her new colleagues, and her future as a nurse. Sometimes the worst moments in life led to the best ones. Sometimes saving someone else's life meant saving your own, and sometimes the person who seems like your enemy turns out to be exactly what you needed.